Imagine a room filled with 20 of the most expensive lawyers in New York City. Ivy League degrees, $5,000 suits, all terrified. They had one job: find the trap in a $200 million contract before the clock struck midnight. They failed. The mafia don at the head of the table was ready to pull the trigger, literally. But then a waitress earning minimum wage, a girl nobody even looked at, poured a cup of coffee, leaned over the billion-dollar document, and whispered 8 words that changed everything. This isn't just a story about money. It's about power betrayal, and the woman who brought the king of the underworld to his knees. This is the story of Cassidy Miller. The air in the private dining room of the Gilded Sturgeon tasted like stale cigar smoke and fear. It was the kind of fear that smelled distinct acrid, like burning rubber. Alessandro De Luca sat at the head of the mahogany table. He wasn't yelling. Alessandro never yelled. Yelling was for street thugs and men who didn't own the police commissioner. Alessandro, at 34, wore his silence like a weapon. He simply tapped his index finger against the crystal rim of his Scotch glass. Clink, clink, clink. To his right sat Giovanni, his consigliere, an old man who had served Alessandro's father. To his left and down the length of the table sat 20 men. They were the best. Analysts from firms that rivaled Goldman Sachs, forensic accountants, headhunted from the FBI, and corporate attorneys whose hourly rates could feed a family of 4 for a year. They were all sweating. "Talk to me, Preston," Alessandro said softly. His voice was a low baritone, smooth, but vibrating with lethal intent. Preston, the lead attorney, adjusted his glasses with a trembling hand. "Mr. De Luca, we've reviewed the acquisition papers for the Newark shipping terminals 3 times. Harrison Vane's team has covered their tracks perfectly. The valuation holds up. The union contracts are clean. If you don't sign by midnight, the deal expires, and Vane sells the logistics route to the Russians." "I don't care about the Russians," Alessandro said, his eyes dark, scanning the paperwork scattered across the table. "I care about the gut feeling, telling me that Harrison Vane doesn't give away a strategic port entry for $200 million, unless it's a bomb wrapped in a bow." "It's a standard acquisition, sir," another executive, a man named Sterling, piped up. "The environmental reports are clear. The EPA has signed off. We secure the port we control, 40% of the Atlantic cargo coming into the tri-state area. It's clean." Alessandro stood up. The room went dead silent. He walked to the window, looking out over the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. Below him, the city moved like a living organism, unaware that a war was being fought in this room. "Harrison Vane killed my uncle over a gambling debt in '98, Alessandro said to the window. "He is a snake, and you 20 men with your Harvard degrees and your Hampton summer homes, you're telling me he's playing fair. The numbers don't lie, Al," Sterling insisted, growing desperate. "We've run the simulations. If we don't buy, we lose the distribution network. We lose the leverage on the construction unions. We have to sign." Alessandro turned around. He looked tired, not sleepy, but weary of incompetence. The De Luca family had spent 50 years legitimizing their business. This deal was supposed to be the final step, owning the logistics chain, so completely that no RICO case could ever touch them. But if Vane was setting a trap, this deal would bankrupt the family's legitimate holdings and leave them exposed to federal indictments. "You have 1 hour," Alessandro said, checking his Patek Philippe watch. "Find the poison pill, or nobody leaves this room with a job, or a tongue." He sat back down. The executives scrambled, shuffling papers, typing furiously into laptops, whispering in panicked, hushed tones about EBITDA and amortization schedules. They were looking, but they weren't seeing. They were looking at the ink. They weren't looking at the story. Cassidy Miller adjusted her apron, wincing slightly as the fabric rubbed against the bruise on her hip, a parting gift from the corner of her tiny, cramped kitchen table in Queens. She took a deep breath, pushing the pain away. She needed this shift. She needed the tips. Her mother's dialysis treatment wasn't covered by their catastrophic insurance plan, and the bill sitting on her counter was bright red, threatening collections. "Table 4 needs a refill," the maitre d', a pompous man named Henri, snapped at her. "And for God's sake, Cassidy, be invisible. Do not speak to them unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact. These are complicated men." "I know the drill, Henri," Cassidy said, her voice raspy from lack of sleep. She picked up the heavy silver coffee pot and the tray of fresh water pitchers. She walked into the private room. She was used to being invisible. She had been invisible her whole life. Invisible in high school when her father went to prison for a Ponzi scheme he didn't commit. Invisible in college when she had to drop out of her forensic accounting program. 3 credits shy of a degree because the money ran out. Invisible now at 26, a genius with numbers scrubbing tables for men who tipped based on her skirt length rather than her service. She moved around the table like a ghost. She filled a water glass for the sweating man named Preston. She poured black coffee for Sterling. They didn't even flinch. To them, she was furniture. She moved toward the head of the table. Alessandro De Luca. She had seen him in the tabloids, usually photographed leaving courthouses or galas with models. In person, he was more terrifying. He radiated a cold magnetic gravity. He was staring at a document in the center of the table, his brow furrowed. Cassidy poured his water. As she did, her eyes fell on the document he was glaring at. It was a schedule of assets, maritime fleet inventory. It was a list of ships included in the sale. Cassidy knew ships. Her father had been a logistics coordinator before the fall. She knew that ships, like cars, had vehicle identification numbers, IMO numbers. She also knew that Harrison Vane, the seller, was notorious for offshore shell companies. She tried to look away. "Not my business," she told herself. "Just pour the water. Get the tip. Go home." But her brain didn't work like that. Her brain was a trap for patterns. She saw the list of ships: the Lady Vane, the North Star, the Oceanus. Next to them were their valuation numbers and their depreciation schedules. The lawyers were arguing about the tax implications of the Oceanus. "The depreciation on the Oceanus allows for a write-off of $12 million, Preston was saying, pointing his expensive pen at the line item. "It's a tax shield, Mr. De Luca. It's a good thing." Cassidy frowned. She looked at the IMO number listed next to the Oceanus. IMO 871452. She paused. The coffee pot hovered in mid-air. 871. That prefix. She remembered reading a case study in her second year of forensic accounting. It was about maritime insurance fraud. Ships built before 1990 had different IMO prefixes in certain registries. The document listed the Oceanus as a 2018 build, but an 871 prefix was from the late 80s. Why would they list an old ship as a new one, unless it wasn't the ship they were selling? She moved to the next page, which was splayed open near Alessandro's hand. It was the Environmental Compliance Certificate. The date on the certificate was October 14th. Cassidy's heart hammered against her ribs. October 14th. She looked at the window. The rain was lashing against the glass. "Don't say anything." Her instinct screamed. These men kill people. But then she thought about the arrogant look on Sterling's face. She thought about her dad rotting in a cell because he signed a paper he didn't read properly. She thought about the $200 million fraud about to happen. She filled Alessandro's glass. "The environmental certificate is valid," Sterling was saying. "It clears the EPA standards for the next 5 years." Alessandro rubbed his temples. "Fine. If the certificate is clean and the tax shield is real, give me the pen." He reached for the gold fountain pen. Cassidy couldn't help it. The injustice of it, the sheer stupidity of these overpaid suits broke her silence. "It's not clean," she whispered. The silence that followed was instantaneous and absolute. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. 20 heads snapped toward her. Henri the maitre d', who had been hovering by the door, looked like he was about to have a stroke. Alessandro De Luca froze. His hand was inches from the pen. He slowly turned his head, looking up at the waitress standing at his elbow. For the first time, he actually saw her. He saw the frayed collar of her uniform, the tired shadows under her intelligent hazel eyes, and the defiant set of her jaw. "Excuse me," Alessandro asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. "Get her out of here," Sterling barked, standing up. "Henri, why is the help listening to private negotiations?" "Wait," Alessandro said. He held up a hand, silencing Sterling. He turned his chair fully toward Cassidy. "You said it's not clean. You have 10 seconds to explain why you interrupted a $200 million closing before I have you thrown out the window." Cassidy's hands were shaking, so she set the coffee pot down on the table with a heavy thud. She needed to be steady. She needed to treat this like an exam. "The environmental certificate," Cassidy said, her voice gaining strength. "It's dated October 14th. "So what?" Preston sneered. "That was 2 weeks ago. It's current." "October 14th was Columbus Day," Cassidy said clearly. "Federal offices were closed. The EPA doesn't issue dated certificates on federal holidays. It's a forgery." The room went dead still again. Alessandro looked at Preston. "Check it." Preston scrambled for his phone, his fingers fumbling. I'm checking the federal calendar." While Preston panicked, Cassidy didn't stop. She pointed a slender, calloused finger at the ship list. "And you're buying the Oceanus as a 2018 new build," she continued, looking directly into Alessandro's dark eyes. "But the IMO number starts with 871. That's a hull prefix for ships registered in Liberia between 1985 and 1989. You aren't buying a new fleet, Mr. De Luca. You're buying scrap metal painted to look like new assets. If you sign this, you'll take ownership of 30-year-old vessels that don't pass current emissions standards. The moment the title transfers, the EPA will fine you $10,000 a day per ship. That's not a tax shield. It's a liability of..." She did the math in her head instantly. $40 million in the first year alone. Alessandro stared at her. His face was unreadable. "Preston?" Alessandro asked, not looking away from Cassidy. Preston had gone pale, the color of old oatmeal. The holiday. She's right. The EPA offices were closed. And the IMO registry. I'm pulling it up now. God." Preston looked up, terrified. The Oceanus was scrapped in a yard in Bangladesh in 2021. It's a ghost ship. It doesn't exist. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. "They aren't selling us a business," Giovanni whispered, his face ashen. "They're selling us a graveyard. And since it's a stock purchase, not an asset purchase, we would be liable for the fraud the moment we sign." "Federal fraud charges," Sterling muttered, sinking into his chair. "RICO predicates." Alessandro sat back. The tension in his shoulders evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. He looked at the contract, then at the pen. He picked up the pen and snapped it in half with one hand. Ink bled onto the white tablecloth, staining it black. $200 million, Alessandro said. "And prison." He looked at his team of 20 executives. 20 of you. $5 million a year in retainers. And the girl who pours the coffee just saved my life. He stood up. He towered over Cassidy, but he didn't look threatening anymore. He looked intrigued. "What is your name?" "Cassidy," she said. "Cassidy Miller." "Well, Cassidy Miller," Alessandro said, reaching into his suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek black business card and a thick money clip. He peeled off a stack of hundreds easily, $2,000, and placed it on her tray. "Take the rest of the night off." I can't," Cassidy stammered. "Henry will fire me." Alessandro looked at Henry, who was trembling by the door. "Henry, if you fire her, I will buy this building and turn it into a parking lot. Do we understand each other?" "Yes, Mr. DeLuca." "Perfectly." Alessandro turned back to Cassidy. The air between them crackled. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was recognition. Game, recognizing game. "Go home, Cassidy," he said softly. "But keep your phone on. I'm going to have a job for you in the morning. A real one." He turned to his men. "Get 'em out, all of you. You're fired. Sterling, leave your laptop. Giovanni, call the car. We're going to pay a visit to Harrison Vane." Cassidy grabbed her tray and backed out of the room, her heart pounding in her ears. She had just saved the most dangerous man in New York a fortune. But as she walked into the kitchen, she didn't realize that by exposing the fraud, she hadn't just saved Alessandro. She had put a target on her own back. Harrison Vane wouldn't be happy that his trap had failed, and he would want to know exactly who had spotted the flaw. The next morning, Cassidy didn't wake up to an alarm. She woke up to a pounding on her apartment door. She lived in a fourth-floor walk-up in Astoria, a place with peeling paint and radiators that clanged like dying pipes. She pulled on a robe, grabbing the pepper spray she kept on her nightstand. "Who is it?" she yelled through the wood. "Giovanni," a gruff voice answered. Cassidy peered through the peephole. It was the old man from the restaurant. Behind him stood two men who looked like they were carved out of granite. She opened the door, leaving the chain on. "What do you want?" "Mr. DeLuca sent us," Giovanni said. He held up a garment bag and a sleek black laptop case. "You have an interview at 10:00 a.m., but first you need to dress the part." "I didn't agree to an interview," Cassidy said, though her heart did a traitorous little flip. "Miss Miller," Giovanni said, his voice lowering, "Mr. DeLuca is not a man who asks twice. Also, he paid off your mother's dialysis center this morning. Paid in full for the next year." Cassidy froze. The chain dropped from her hand. The door swung open. "He did what? He likes to invest in assets," Giovanni said with a small, rare smile. "And he thinks you are an undervalued asset. Get dressed. We are going to Vanguard Tower." An hour later, Cassidy was standing in a corner office that cost more than her entire neighborhood. She was wearing the suit Giovanni had brought, a tailored navy blazer and trousers that fit her perfectly. She felt like an imposter, but she looked like a shark. Alessandro was behind his desk. He looked different in the daylight. Less like a mob boss, more like a CEO. But the danger was still there, lurking in the sharp lines of his face. "Sit," he said, not looking up from a file. Cassidy sat. "You paid my mom's bills. Why?" "Consider it a signing bonus," Alessandro said. He finally looked up. His eyes locked onto hers. "I looked into you, Cassidy. Top of your class at Baruch before you dropped out. Dean's List. A photographic memory for numbers. Why were you serving coffee to idiots?" "Life happens," Cassidy said defensively. "My dad got set up. We lost everything. I had to work." "Your dad was convicted of embezzlement at Chaotic Logistics," Alessandro said. He slid a folder across the desk. "I read the court transcripts. He was innocent." He was the fall guy for a partner who cooked the books. Cassidy felt tears prick her eyes. I know that. Nobody else believed it. I believe it, Alessandro said, because the man who set your father up is the same man who tried to sell me those ghost ships last night. Harrison Vane. The room spun slightly. Vane. He was my dad's boss. Small world, Alessandro said grimly. Vane destroyed your family. Now he's trying to destroy mine. I want to hurt him, Cassidy. I want to take everything he has. But I don't need shooters. I have plenty of those. I need someone who can see the numbers. I need someone who can find where he hides his money so I can steal it. He leaned forward. I fired my entire acquisition team last night. I'm offering you the job. Head of Internal Auditing. Salary is $300,000 a year, plus bonuses. Cassidy stared at him. It was a deal with the devil. She knew who Alessandro was. She knew what his family did. But Harrison Vane. Vane was the reason her dad died of a heart attack in prison. Vane was the reason her mom was sick from stress. I'm in, Cassidy said, but I have conditions. Alessandro raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating always, she said, channeling a confidence she didn't feel. I don't touch the illegal stuff. I don't want to know about drugs or weapons. I only touch the legitimate logistics business, and if I find Vane's money, I want 5% of whatever we recover. Alessandro smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that transformed his face, making him devastatingly handsome. You're greedy, he said approvingly. I like that. Done. He stood up and offered his hand. Cassidy took it. His grip was warm and firm. Welcome to the family, Cassidy. 3 weeks later, Cassidy was running the department. She wasn't just good, she was relentless. She found redundancies that saved the company millions. She renegotiated contracts that the previous lawyers had been too lazy to read. But the main prize was Vane. She spent her nights in the office, surrounded by boxes of shredded documents that Alessandro's men had acquired from Vane's trash. She was piecing together a paper trail. It was 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. The office was dark, save for her desk lamp. Alessandro walked in. He was holding 2 containers of Chinese takeout. You need to eat, he said, placing the boxes on her desk. I'm close, Al, she said, not looking up. She had started calling him Al. He hadn't stopped her. I found a shell company in the Cayman Islands, Blue Heron Holdings. It's receiving monthly wire transfers from one of your own subsidiaries. Alessandro froze his chopsticks halfway to his mouth. My subsidiary? Which one? The Staten Island Dry Dock, Cassidy said. The one managed by... She clicked a file open. Sterling Rourke. Alessandro's face darkened. Sterling. I didn't fire him. I kept him on as a consultant because he knew the union reps. You're telling me he's paying Vane? He's skimming, Cassidy said. He's overcharging for repairs that never happen and sending the difference to Blue Heron. And guess who is the signatory for Blue Heron? She turned the screen around. Alessandro leaned in his face, inches from hers. She could smell his cologne sandalwood and expensive tobacco. Her breath hitched. Harrison Vane, Alessandro read. Sterling has been working for him the whole time. He was the one pushing me to sign the bad deal at the restaurant. Exactly, Cassidy said. He wanted you to sign so Vane could bankrupt you and Sterling would probably get a cut of the insurance payout. Alessandro straightened up. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by the icy, killer instinct she had seen that first night. Get your coat, he said. Where are we going? We are going to have a performance review with Sterling. Al, Cassidy said, standing up and grabbing his arm. Don't kill him. Alessandro looked at her hand on his arm. He didn't pull away. He stole from me. He betrayed me to my enemy. If you kill him, the money trail disappears, Cassidy argued. He knows where Vane keeps the rest of it. Use him. Scare him. Make him a double agent. But don't kill him. We need him to testify or to give us the access codes. Alessandro looked at her for a long moment. The rage in his eyes battled with the logic she was offering. You're dangerous, he murmured. You think like a gangster. I think like an accountant, she corrected. Dead men don't pay restitution. Alessandro sighed. Fine. We do it your way. But you stay in the car. No, Cassidy said. I found the trail. I want to see him squirm. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour by the time Giovanni's black SUV skidded onto the gravel of the Staten Island dry docks. The industrial floodlights hummed, casting long skeletal shadows across the rusted hulls of ships under repair. Sterling Roark was inside a prefabricated office trailer overlooking the water. He was shredding documents. When the door kicked open, Sterling jumped so hard he knocked his expensive scotch onto the floor. Alessandro stepped in, soaking wet, his coat billowing like a cape. Cassidy followed her laptop bag clutched tight against her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. Alessandro, Sterling stammered, backing up against the shredder. I was just doing some late-night filing. You were erasing your tracks, Alessandro said calmly. He walked over to the desk, picked up a wet piece of paper from the floor, and inspected it. But you're sloppy, Sterling. You always were. I don't know what you're talking about. Cassidy, Alessandro said, stepping aside. Cassidy stepped forward. She placed her laptop on Sterling's desk and flipped it open. The screen glowed with a complex web of wire transfers. I traced the routing numbers, Sterling, she said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. You set up a mirrored server to falsify the repair invoices. You charged the company $4.5 million for engine overhauls on ships that were sitting in scrapyards. Then you routed the money through a shell company in the Caymans. Blue Heron Holdings. Sterling's face went white. That's circumstantial. It gets worse, Cassidy continued, gaining momentum. I found the email correspondence in the server logs. You didn't just steal money. You sent Harrison Vane the security schedules for Alessandro's family transport. You told him where Alessandro would be last Thursday. The silence in the trailer was deafening. Alessandro went very still. Last Thursday, his car had been T-boned by a truck. He had walked away with bruises, but it was an assassination attempt. Alessandro looked at Sterling. You sold my life for money. I had no choice, Sterling screamed, cracking under the pressure. Vane has leverage. He has photos. Debts. Gambling debts I couldn't pay. He owns me. Al. He said if I didn't give him the intel, he'd kill me. So you decided to let him kill me instead, Alessandro said. He pulled a gun from his holster. It was a matte black Beretta. Sterling fell to his knees, sobbing. Please, I can help you. I know his next move. Don't shoot him, Cassidy said sharply. Alessandro paused, his finger on the trigger. He looked at Cassidy. Give me one reason. Because he's the bait, Cassidy said. Her mind was racing faster than it ever had in a spreadsheet. Vane thinks Sterling is still loyal. If you kill him, Vane knows the jig is up, and he goes underground. If we keep Sterling alive, we can make him feed Vane bad information. Alessandro looked at the weeping man on the floor, then at the fierce woman standing beside him. He lowered the gun. You're right, Alessandro said. He grabbed Sterling by the collar and hauled him up. You work for us now. You're going to call Vane. You're going to tell him the audit is clean. You're going to tell him I'm letting my guard down. And then, Sterling whimpered. And then, Cassidy said, stepping closer, her eyes hard. You're going to tell us where his master ledger is, because a man like Vane doesn't trust banks. He keeps a physical record. Where is it? Sterling hesitated. Alessandro pressed the barrel of the gun into Sterling's cheek. The penthouse. Sterling gasped. The safe in his penthouse at the Obsidian Tower. It's biometric. But the servers are in the basement. If you can get into the local network, you can drain his accounts before he even knows you're there. Alessandro shoved Sterling into a chair. Giovanni, watch him. If he moves, shoot him. Alessandro grabbed Cassidy's hand. Let's go. Where? To the Obsidian Tower. We're going to rob a thief. The drive back to Manhattan was electric. Alessandro drove this time, his hand occasionally brushing Cassidy's as he shifted gears. The tension between them had shifted from professional respect to something hotter, more dangerous. You were incredible back there, Alessandro said, his eyes on the road. Most people freeze when they see a gun. You started negotiating. I grew up in Queens, dodging eviction notices, Cassidy said with a tired smile. Survival is just about calculating the odds. And what are our odds tonight? If Sterling isn't lying 50-50. I like those odds. Alessandro grinned. They arrived at the Obsidian Tower, Vane's headquarters. It was a fortress of black glass. Alessandro parked the car 2 blocks away. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a tablet and a small device that looked like a USB drive. This is a localized hacking tool, Alessandro explained. My tech guys built it. If you can plug this into the server port in the basement, it will give you remote access to Vane's accounts. I'll go to the penthouse and distract Vane. Distract him? Cassidy frowned. He wants to kill you. Exactly. He'll be too focused on gloating to notice his bank accounts hitting 0. Al, that's suicide, Cassidy said, grabbing his arm. Alessandro turned to her. In the dim light of the dashboard, his expression softened. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline. I trust you, Cassidy, he whispered. You saved me once with a sentence. Now save me with your skills. Get to the basement. Drain him dry. Once the money is gone, his power is gone. He leaned in and kissed her. It was brief, desperate, and tasted of rain and danger. When he pulled away, Cassidy felt dizzy. Go, he said. Cassidy grabbed the device and ran towards the service entrance. The basement was a maze of pipes and humming machinery. Cassidy found the server room door locked, of course. She used the keycard Alessandro had taken from Sterling's wallet. The light turned green. She slipped inside. Rows of blue lights blinked in the darkness. It was cold. She found the main terminal and plugged in the USB device. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She bypassed the firewall using the back door Sterling had described. Access granted. She saw it all. Harrison Vane's empire. Hundreds of millions of dollars, all dirty. All sitting in offshore accounts. Okay, Vane, she muttered. Let's see how you like being broke. She initiated the transfer protocol. She was routing the money into a holding account controlled by the FBI, an anonymous tip she had set up. She wasn't stealing the money for Alessandro. She was giving it to the feds. That was the only way to end this legally. Transfer 10%. 20%. Suddenly the lights in the server room turned red. A siren blared. Trap. The door behind her hissed open. Cassidy spun around. Standing there wasn't security. It was Harrison Vane himself. He was a tall, skeletal man, with eyes like ice. He was holding a pistol and he was smiling. Behind him stood 2 massive bodyguards. "Did you really think Sterling didn't call me the second you left the room?" Vane asked smoothly. "Sterling is a coward, Miss Miller. He plays both sides." Cassidy backed up against the servers. "Where is Alessandro?" "Mr. DeLuca is currently in the elevator, which I have halted between the 40th and 41st floors." Vane chuckled. "He's trapped in a metal box, and I'm going to drop it. But first, you." He walked closer, glancing at the screen. "Trying to steal my fortune, ambitious for a waitress." "I'm not a waitress," Cassidy spat. "I'm the auditor." "You're a loose end," Vane said. He raised the gun. "Stop the transfer." Cassidy looked at the screen. "Transfer 45%. She looked at Vane. If she stopped it, he would kill her anyway. If she let it finish, he would kill her, but he would be ruined. "No," she said. Vane's eyes narrowed. "I don't think you understand. I'm going to kill you, then I'm going to drop your boyfriend's elevator." "If you shoot me," Cassidy said, her voice trembling but loud, "my hand comes off the keyboard. This is a dead man's switch. If I don't enter a code, every 10 seconds the system locks and deletes the encryption keys. You lose the money forever." It was a lie, a bluff. But it was a sophisticated bluff. Vane hesitated. Greed was his weakness. "You're lying." Look at the code on the screen. Auto-destruct sequence ready." She pointed to a random line of command text. Vane lowered the gun slightly, squinting at the screen. That was the moment. The elevator shaft echoed with a massive clang. Vane flinched. What was that? Suddenly, the ventilation grate in the ceiling of the server room kicked out. A dark shape dropped from the ceiling, landing in a crouch between Vane and Cassidy. It was Alessandro. He was covered in grease, his suit torn, bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He had climbed out of the elevator hatch and slid down the cables. "Al!" Cassidy screamed. Alessandro didn't speak. He moved. He tackled Vane before the older man could raise his gun. The 2 bodyguards lunged, but Alessandro was a whirlwind of rage. He broke the first guard's nose with an elbow and swept the second one's legs out from under him. The gun skittered across the floor. It slid to Cassidy's feet. Vane scrambled for a backup weapon in his ankle holster. Alessandro was grappling with the guards. Cassidy picked up the gun. Her hands shook. She had never held a weapon before. It was heavy. Vane pulled a knife and lunged at Alessandro's exposed back. "Aiel!" Cassidy screamed. She aimed. She didn't close her eyes. She calculated the trajectory. Bang! The bullet didn't hit Vane. It hit the fire suppression pipe directly above his head. A blast of high-pressure chemical foam and freezing water exploded downward, knocking Vane flat on his face and blinding him. Alessandro used the distraction. He delivered a brutal right hook to Vane's jaw, knocking him cold. Silence returned to the room, save for the hissing of the broken pipe. Alessandro stood up, breathing hard. He looked at Cassidy. She was still holding the gun, pointing it at the floor. "You missed," Alessandro panted, wiping blood from his eye. "I never miss," Cassidy said, dropping the gun and pointing at the screen. "Transfer complete." "I needed him alive to go to prison," she said. "But I needed him broke first." Alessandro looked at the screen. 0.0 balance. He looked back at her, awe written all over his face. He walked over, stepped over the unconscious body of Harrison Vane, and pulled her into his arms. "Remind me never to piss you off," he murmured into her hair. The silence in the server room of the Obsidian Tower was heavier than the gunfire had been. Harrison Vane was zip-tied unconscious and slumped against a rack of humming hard drives. The fire suppression foam was beginning to dissolve, leaving a slick chemical residue on the floor. Cassidy leaned against the cold metal of the server bank, her knees finally giving way. The adrenaline that had fueled her for the last 48 hours was draining out, leaving her shaking. Alessandro didn't speak. He walked over to her, his Italian leather shoes squelching on the wet floor. He looked like a wreck. His tailored suit was ruined, a cut above his eye was bleeding sluggishly, and his knuckles were bruised purple. But in that moment, Cassidy thought he looked like a god of war. He stopped in front of her. He didn't touch her immediately. He just looked at her, scanning her face, as if checking for cracks in a diamond. "You didn't run," he said, his voice rough. "I had a job to do," Cassidy whispered. "The transfer had to finish. You could have died, Cassidy. For money. For my money." "Not for the money," she corrected him, her voice gaining a fraction of its usual steel. "For the win. I wanted to beat him. For my dad." Alessandro's expression broke. The cold mask of the dawn shattered, revealing the man beneath. He reached out his hand, cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed away a smudge of grease on her jaw. "You beat him," Alessandro said softly. "You destroyed him without pulling a trigger. You are the most terrifying creature I have ever met." The sirens began to wail in the distance. The FBI units Cassidy had tipped off were closing in. "We have to go," Alessandro said, snapping back into command mode. "Sterling is already singing to the authorities. Vane is gift-wrapped. If we stay, we have to answer questions I don't want to answer." "I can't just leave," Cassidy said. "I'm the auditor. I'm the witness." "You're neither," Alessandro said, grabbing her hand. "Tonight you're a ghost. Tomorrow you're the CEO. Let the feds take the credit. We take the empire." 90 days later. The transition from the underworld to the boardroom wasn't a smooth road. It was a cliff face. For the first 3 months, Cassidy barely saw the inside of her apartment. She lived in Vanguard Tower. Alessandro had given her carte blanche to sanitize the DeLuca Empire. He called it the Great Purge. It wasn't just about balancing books, it was about changing a culture. On a rainy Tuesday in November, Cassidy walked into the main conference room. The atmosphere was hostile. Seated around the table were 12 men, Capo's union leaders, and legacy partners who had worked for Alessandro's father. They were men who solved problems with lead pipes, not spreadsheets. They looked at Cassidy with a mixture of boredom and disdain. To them, she was still just the coffee girl Alessandro was sleeping with. Cassidy threw a heavy binder onto the table. The thud echoed in the room. "Gentlemen," she started, remaining standing. "I've reviewed the operational costs for the South Jersey trucking fleet." "We don't need a math lesson, sweetheart," a man named Rocco grunted. He was thick-necked and wore a pinky ring the size of a walnut. "We run the trucks how we run the trucks. Skim off the top, pay the drivers cash. It's how it works." Alessandro was sitting at the head of the table, leaning back in his chair, watching. He didn't intervene. This was Cassidy's test. Cassidy turned her cold hazel gaze to Rocco. She didn't blink. "Rocco, you're skimming 12% off the fuel budget," she said. "You think you're clever because you're burying it in the maintenance ledger under tire replacement. But I checked the mileage. Unless your trucks are driving on sandpaper, you're spending 3 times the industry average on tires." Rocco turned red. "Now listen here." "No, you listen." Cassidy interrupted, her voice dropping an octave. "Your 12% skim netted you $40,000 last month. But because you're cooking the books, we can't claim the fuel tax credits. You cost the family $200,000 in tax rebates to steal 40 grand for yourself." The room went deadly silent. "You aren't a gangster, Rocco," Cassidy said, leaning over the table. "You're a bad investment, and I'm liquidating you." She tossed a packet of papers toward him. "You're fired. Security will escort you out. If you try to contact any of the drivers, the IRS gets a copy of your personal tax returns, which I have also prepared. And Rocco. They aren't pretty." Rocco looked at Alessandro, pleading for help. "Boss, you gonna let a skirt talk to me like this?" Alessandro took a slow sip of his espresso. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Rocco, she just saved me 160 grand in 2 minutes. If she tells you to leave, you leave, before she decides to audit your pension." Rocco left. After the door clicked shut, the remaining 11 men sat up straighter. They buttoned their jackets. They opened their notebooks. "Now," Cassidy said, smoothing her skirt, "let's discuss the warehouse inventory." Despite the professional victories, the space between Cassidy and Alessandro remained undefined. They were partners in war, partners in business, but at night there was a hesitation. It was late December. The city was dusted with snow. Cassidy was in her office, staring at the lights of Manhattan. The acquisition of Harrison Vane's assets was finalized. DeLuca Logistics was now the largest shipping conglomerate on the East Coast. Legitimate, clean, untouchable. But Cassidy felt hollow. The door opened. Alessandro walked in. He held 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of vintage Barolo. "Celebrating alone?" he asked. "Just thinking," Cassidy said, turning her chair around. "We did it, Al. Vane is serving 20 years. My dad's name is cleared in the press. The stock is at an all-time high." "And yet," Alessandro said, pouring the wine, "you look like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop." "I'm waiting for you to get bored," Cassidy admitted. The vulnerability burned her throat, but she was too tired to lie. "I was the tool you needed to fix the company. The job is done. The company is fixed. Usually when a consultant finishes a job, they get a check and a handshake." Alessandro set the wine down. He walked around the desk, invading her personal space. The air between them crackled, charged with 6 months of unsaid things. "Is that what you think you are?" he asked quietly. "A consultant?" "I don't know what I am," Cassidy whispered. "I know I was a waitress. Then I was a weapon. Now, I don't know." Alessandro reached out and took her hand. He didn't pull her toward him. He just held her fingers, tracing the lifelines on her palm. "My father told me that trust is a currency," Alessandro said. "You spend it, and once it's gone, you never get it back. I spent my whole life surrounded by men who would kiss my ring and then sell me to the FBI for a reduced sentence. 20 executives in that room, Cassidy. 20 men I paid millions, and they watched me walk into a trap." He stepped closer, his legs brushing against her knees. "You were the only one who saw the truth. You were the only one who spoke up. You saved my fortune, yes. You saved my life, yes. But Cassidy, you saved my soul. You turned a criminal empire into something I can be proud to leave to my children." Cassidy's breath hitched. "Children. Eventually." Alessandro smirked, the darkness in his eyes replaced by warmth. "But first I have one final deal to close." He checked his watch. "Go home. Get dressed. The car will pick you up in 2 hours. Where are we going?" "Back to where it started." The restaurant was empty. Alessandro had bought it 3 months ago, but he hadn't changed a thing. The velvet curtains were still heavy and red. The chandeliers still dripped with crystal. But tonight there was no maitre d', no terrified waiters, no smoke. There was just one table set in the center of the room. Candlelight flickered against the mahogany walls. Cassidy walked in, wearing a dress of liquid silver, a stark contrast to the stained uniform she had worn the night they met. She felt the ghosts of her old self in this room. She remembered the ache in her feet, the fear of spilling coffee, the invisibility. Alessandro stood by the table. He wore a tuxedo classic and sharp. He looked like the Prince of New York. He pulled out her chair. Ms. Miller. Mr. DeLuca. They sat. Dinner was served by the head chef himself, terrified to interrupt them. They ate in a comfortable intimacy, talking not about business, but about everything else. They talked about her mother, who was now healthy and living in a condo in Florida. They talked about Alessandro's childhood, growing up in the shadow of the mob. When the plates were cleared, Alessandro poured 2 glasses of champagne. "I have a presentation," he said. Cassidy laughed. "Al, please tell me you didn't bring a PowerPoint." Better. He reached under the table and pulled out a single leather-bound document. He slid it across the table. Cassidy opened it. It was a deed of ownership. It wasn't for a ship. It wasn't for a warehouse. It was for the Gilded Sturgeon. "I transferred the title to your name this morning," Alessandro said. "You own the building. You own the land. You own the restaurant." Cassidy stared at the paper. "Why?" "Because this is where you felt small," Alessandro said intensely. "I want you to own the places that made you feel small. I want you to walk in here and know that you are the queen of this kingdom." Tears pricked Cassidy's eyes. It was the most strangely romantic gesture she could have imagined. "But there is a clause," Alessandro added. "There's always a clause." She wiped a tear away, smiling. "What is it?" "Turn to the last page." Cassidy flipped the thick paper. There was no legal jargon on the last page. There was just a small velvet box taped to the center of the document. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might bruise. With trembling fingers, she pulled the box free and opened it. The diamond was massive, an emerald cut flawless, set in platinum. It caught the candlelight and fractured it into 1,000 rainbows. It was cold fire. Alessandro stood up. He walked to her side of the table and dropped to one knee. The man who knelt for no one. The man who made mayors and police commissioners bow to him. He was on his knees on the hardwood floor. "Cassidy," he said. His voice wasn't smooth now. It was raw. "I have analyzed the risk. I have run the projections. Life without you is a deficit I cannot sustain. You are my greatest asset, my only partner, and the love of my life." He took the ring from the box. "I don't want a merger," he said. "I want a lifetime contract. No exit strategy, no escape clauses. Just you and me until the lights go out." He looked up at her, his dark eyes shining. "Cassidy Miller, will you marry me?" Cassidy looked at the man who had pulled her out of the shadows. She looked at the ring. She looked at the restaurant she now owned. She realized she hadn't just saved him $200 million. She had found the one thing in the world that couldn't be quantified. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder. "Yes, absolutely." Alessandro slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her hand alone. He stood up and pulled her into a kiss that made the rest of the world dissolve. It was a kiss of promise, of passion, and of victory. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Cassidy rested her forehead against his chest. She could hear his heart beating strong, steady, and hers. "You know," she murmured, looking up at him with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Since I own the restaurant now, I'm going to have to institute some new policies." "Oh." Alessandro raised an eyebrow, his hands resting on her waist. "Like what?" "Policy number 1, Cassidy said, grinning. "The coffee is free for the boss, but the advice that's going to cost you." "Name your price," Alessandro challenged. Cassidy kissed him again, smiling against his lips. I want 50% of the company." Alessandro laughed, a rich, deep sound that filled the empty room. "Done," he said. "You already own 100% of the owner anyway." And that is how Cassidy Miller went from pouring coffee to running an empire. She proved that in a world of muscle and violence, the sharpest weapon is always the mind. Harrison Vane is currently serving 20 years in federal prison, and as for Alessandro and Cassidy, well, let's just say they're the ultimate power couple. If you loved this story of betrayal, intelligence, and high-stakes romance, smash that like button right now. It helps the channel bring you more stories like this. What would you have done if you saw that mistake in the contract? Would you have spoken up? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next saga. Until next time.